And now I'm going to click. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this LinkedIn Live entitled Workplace Allies Live, How to Be a Better Ally in the Workplace. My name is Julie Savarino, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Brad Johnson, who is one of the co-authors of this exceptional book entitled Good Guys, How Men Can Be Better Allies for Women in the Workplace. It's actually published by Harvard Business Review. Brad is a doctor. He's a clinical psychologist. He's a professor of psychology at the U.S. Naval Academy. He's also a faculty associate at Johns Hopkins and a former officer in the Navy Medical Service Corps. Brad, thank you so much for being here.
I am delighted to be here, Julie.
Well, he's joined by his co-author, again, of this beyond outstanding book, and I say that very seriously. It's one of the best I've ever read, and I've read many, Dr. David Smith. Dr. Smith is an associate professor at the Johns Hopkins Carey Business School. He is also a former professor at the U.S. Naval Academy. He actually was a pilot in the Navy. Well, thank you both for your service because, as you know, I worship all of our veterans and military. David was recently sworn in as a new member of the U.S. Defense Advisory Committee on Women in the Services. Now, in addition to those incredible credentials, they are both exceptional authors, researchers, but more importantly, experts on gender at work issues. Please join me in welcoming them.
Thanks, Julie. It's great to be here.
Okay, just two housekeeping things quickly. If you have a question, go ahead and look on the right side of your computer if you're on a desktop, and you should see a comment box, and you can go ahead and put in a question or a comment there. The second super exciting thing is we're doing a giveaway. One of their great books, David and Brad have generously offered not only to give you a book, one winner, but also to personally autograph it. So the way we're going to do that is it's called this giveaway tool. Can everyone see this? I hope you can. It says basically all you have to do is write into the comments the symbol hashtag and the word ally, A-L-L-Y. So hashtag ally, and you're going to be automatically entered to win, and I'll draw the winner in just a little bit. So as of now, I don't see anybody who put the hashtag ally in, but please do, because that's what you're going to need to do in order to win this book. Okay, with that said, I am going to change the layout just a tad, and I'm going to ask David and Brad to get into it and ask you the first question, which is, how do you define a male ally? Could you describe like 2 or 3 key behaviors that a male ally does for women, please?
Yeah, and Brad, maybe let me start here, and then maybe you can give some examples of as we think about defining what an ally is. And I think this is a great question because I think a lot of us, Julie, have different ideas about the meaning of what an ally is or what allyship means to people. And so kind of leveling the playing field here is really, I think, a really smart way to do this. And so Brad and I'd love to keep this very actionable and operational. And we look at an ally as somebody who demonstrates or exhibits these types of behaviors. And the first is this grouping of what we think of as interpersonal ally skills. And this is really about the individual part, about how we hold ourselves accountable for how we're showing up in the workplace and the kinds of relationships we have, and how do we show up as a supportive and collaborative colleague. If you have equity and fairness initiatives in your organization, how do you show up in those spaces? A lot of this, again, back to you as the individual, holding yourself accountable for doing the work around creating self-awareness and intelligence about how others may be experiencing the workplace differently. That's the easy part. The harder parts of allyship get into public allyship. And this is where it's not just holding yourself accountable, but holding other people accountable. So your peers and maybe your leaders of your organization. And this is around the ideas around when you hear or see something that may be biased or sexist, that you have to say or do something there. There's the action that you have to do publicly with everybody there. The other part of it is around public advocacy. And I think this is a very important part. And this happens both in kind of formal ways or everyday informal ways as well, and how we advocate for others. And so those are key critical elements as we think about actions that allies do. The last part is really getting to one of the harder parts of this, because it takes a lot of pulling all this awareness and education, intelligence, and action together. And that's thinking about the systemic part of allyship. And how do we begin to change everyday actions where bias exists? We've learned about these things, and it can create a systemic inequity, like a pay gap or a lack of representation in our senior leadership positions. And so now I have an obligation to hold myself accountable and others accountable for how do we change that to make it more equitable for everyone. And of course, there's a lot of everyday actions that go into each of those three groups. But let me let Brad maybe share a few of those with you.
Yeah, and because we don't have 5 hours, I'm going to keep this really short. We're just kicking off here. But here are some tactics. Number one, how about self-educating? There's so much great stuff on gender equity, including gender headwinds that women encounter. So do some self-learning. Watch some great videos, listen to podcasts, do some reading, attend events in your organization. Oh yeah, there's this book, Good Guys, might be helpful. Attend events, focused on gender, and learn and listen. Practice situational awareness in the typical meeting. Look around. Who feels comfortable? Who's being interrupted? Who's having their voice heard? Or who's not getting an opportunity to speak? Avoid assumptions, especially about women. If you happen to be a male, don't assume that she doesn't want this job or this promotion, even if it does involve travel. Ask her, check in with her, find out what her ideal career might look like. Don't make assumptions about her. How about promoting transparency? Is there secrecy around pay and upcoming advancement? Things that men tend to share with each other, but perhaps women get cut out of that secret intel. Make that more transparent. And finally, Dave mentioned the hard part, public allyship. You gotta disrupt, right? You're in a meeting, not if, but when you're in that meeting and there's a sexist, inappropriate comment, are you ready to disrupt? And then after you disrupt, are you ready to own it? Make it clear that you're the one who was uncomfortable, not the minoritized person, maybe a woman in the room. I think those are some great tactics just to start with.
Good question. Here, give me examples of how you disrupt. What do you say?
Oh man, we have a lot of these, but here's the problem, Julie. Within roughly 3 seconds, the research shows something called bystander paralysis sets in, right? So that really sexist comment just got made. I feel uncomfortable, but if I don't disrupt within a few seconds, I'm probably not going to. So we have a 2-second rule. Within 2 seconds, do something. And if you're not sure what to say, how about just ouch? Or some other disruptor. The beauty of this, everyone's going to look at you. It's kind of awkward, but it buys you a few more seconds to then articulate what was not okay. And it could be something as simple as, that wasn't funny. We don't do that here. That sounds like a stereotype. I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't say that again. But you got to disrupt.
Okay, so like what's in it for men to even want to do this? Because I know it's scary. Because I mean, I just did it yesterday I met some Amish people in the hospital, and I felt so awkward. And I'm such a people person, but I felt so awkward going up to them. But I said, could I ask you some things about where you come from in your background? Because I'm interested.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is something we don't talk enough about. So I'm glad you're asking this, Julie. And when it comes to gender equity, I think men don't hear often enough what's in it for them. And I'll mention a few, Dave. You may have some others, but gosh, we find that in the 21st century workplace, men who get this right, men who are known as inclusive leaders, tend to get more promotions, right? They are recognized as inclusive leaders. Those are the folks we want in key leadership roles. Their interpersonal skills get better. Their EQ scores get higher. And these are things, relational kind of super skills that I get to take home. It's not just limited to work. It makes me a better parent, a better partner. So men get better when they have close collegial relationships with women in the workplace. And just one other, I think men who get this right have broader networks. They have women in what Dave and I call their inner core who trust them, who give them feedback. And this just makes them better as leaders and as colleagues.
Well, what are some of the biggest challenges and hurdles that you think men have in these areas, and what can they be doing to overcome them, please?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think this is one that when we first started doing the research and really thinking about how do we engage more men in doing this work? Because there's a lot of men on the sidelines. And for a lot of different reasons out there. And I think when Brad and I started doing the research for our first book, Athena Rising, we found so many of these that we called it the reluctant male syndrome. And we are saying that a little tongue in cheek, but really there are a lot of these different reasons that hold us back from becoming the mentors, the allies, the sponsors, the advocates that we need in the workplace today. And let me just give you a few examples of those. And some of that, is back to bias. And it gets, if I look at women and I see them in a way that is, maybe I see them as kind of nice and warm and nurturing. This is what we often call the women are wonderful effect. That's great. It all sounds very positive. But what I'm not saying and what I'm not seeing is her as a competent, kick-ass leader. Right, that's going to really take charge, and she's the future of our organization. And if I don't see her that way, I may hold back. I may see her as a risky investment. I don't want to invest my time in mentoring her, or even have her associated with me as a sponsor. Right, because what happens if she fails or she doesn't go far? It looks bad on me. So men might hold back in a lot of different ways when they think about that. The other aspect of this that I think many people are probably thinking about is also kind of the maternity aspect, and certainly the idea that women could potentially become pregnant and have to take a little bit of time away to give birth and for their children and care for them. Suddenly now they're at risk of losing them. And again, men have this idea, this bias about these things happening, and it really holds them back from doing everything they could possibly be doing when it comes to great mentoring, sponsoring, and being a great ally in the workplace. Other men have told us that they're kind of scared of women in some ways, and this may surprise you. And Me Too certainly exacerbated some of this when it happened. That suddenly women became scary and hard to work with, or prickly in some way, and men just avoided it. And there were a lot of these false accusations, these notions of false accusations going around. And when it came to sexual harassment, it was men that were perpetuating these. They were perpetuating all of these myths out there. And so we have to hold each other accountable for doing that, because again, I think it's really helpful that when we hear this, to push back and just remind men that, hey, here's what Me Too is all about. Me Too is really about women wanting to come to work and not be assaulted or harassed. I mean, it's a really low bar for us as guys. I think we can do a lot better than that. And think about, again, how are we out there pushing back on that and really making the workplace better for her in all these different ways. So there's a host of these different reasons. And sometimes, we can get into more about this about when it comes to allyship specifically, but sometimes we don't always see things. We don't have the awareness. And this is back to what Brad was talking about in the very beginning, about developing that awareness and being observant and listening and being able, so that we don't have these blind spots that hold us back from taking action, or at least seeing the opportunity to take action and thinking about what it is we want to do. So overcoming that, and as well as our ability to overestimate how much we're actually doing in many cases too.
Excellent. Hey, so I have a question that came in anonymously. What can you do about bosses that think they're supportive of women, but in reality are not? Examples: unconscious biases and passive aggressive behaviors, please.
Boy, I wish I could say that rarely happens, but that would be not true. There's a lot of research. Dave and I sometimes laugh at this. We call this the aspiration execution gap, right? Men assume because they believe in fairness and equity and justice that they must be great allies. And what they're missing is that belief does not always translate to behavior, right? So they're not executing ally tactics every day in the workplace. Interestingly, in social psych, we find that when it comes to estimating one's competence or performance in almost any area, men tend to inflate compared to women. So if we're talking about attractiveness or intelligence or driving skill, men think they're better than they are. And unfortunately, it's not a different story when it comes to ally behavior. I think men need feedback that, hey, you think that you're doing these things. Actually, your female colleagues don't see that. They don't see you showing up this way. So we need men to get feedback, I think. And, sometimes these men in leadership who are self-congratulatory or insist on the label of ally are probably missing it, right? Allyship is not a destination. You don't get a certificate at the end. This is a journey, right? We're always learning. We're always stepping in it. We're trying to get better, even when we make mistakes. So you got to stay humble and you got to stay curious. I would also say for that gentleman in the scenario you gave, Julia, I really think that that person doesn't have an inner core of women. I think he's not getting feedback about how he's doing, right? And I have to say that's on him because he probably hasn't developed trusting relationships with some women who are willing to do that.
And maybe not male allies either, who
Maybe
could give him
male
some of
allies.
that feedback as well. And that feedback is critical to us getting better and learning along the way.
I was trying to switch it. It's not working. Hey, okay, so wait a minute though. So going back to that was an excellent point. But one of the things, in order to be an ally, we have to have the humility and the sort of lack of fear to say to somebody, hey, could you give me some flat out feedback about how I'm doing with working with Black people or women or whoever? Is that what you're kind of saying?
I'm kind of saying that. And then when somebody, and I think part of the obligation there, Julie, is that you have got to develop trusting relationships with people who don't look like you, right? Whether it's people of color, whether it's women, whether it's your LGBTQ colleagues, don't assume that they're going to see it as their job to correct your behavior unless you have spent the time to develop great trusting relationships that are reciprocal in nature with them. If you do that, you're going to have an inner core of people who know where your heart is, they know what your intent is, and when they see you say that thing in the meeting that makes everyone cringe, they're going to give you the feedback. They're going to pull me aside, right, and say, "Hey, Brad, brother, when you said that today, that didn't land the right way. You got to be more thoughtful." And then I need to thank them and work on getting better, and they need to see that I'm working on it, and that's how we develop these relationships.
In your book, you described this concept of listening generously. Could you please talk about that, David?
Yeah, absolutely. And this came up in both books. And so across interviews for two different research projects, two different books about how I think it was one of the big surprises for me and Brad about how often women told us that, I guess, as just as a broad gender-based um, uh, you know character or quality we had as men, that maybe we're not the best listeners. Some of that might be socialized, I suspect a lot of it, and sometimes maybe from a leadership perspective that might be. But they were talking about that listening, as you said, from a very specific perspective around listening generously, listening to hear a different perspective, listening to really understand one's point of view, even though you may not agree with it. Listening to not solve a problem, not to hear a problem, and certainly not to fix a problem or fix her. But in many cases, just being a good sounding board, being a good colleague. And then at the end, maybe offer the opportunity. It's like, I hear what you're saying, and maybe that sounds hard. And if there's anything I could do to help, please let me know. But making the offer and not making an assumption that I have to step in and fix a problem for her. But too often, I think that has been the challenge, is that I think we as men have been, when we look and at having a conversation with a woman, that we're listening for a problem that we have to fix, and that's not what women want.
It's really boils down to having some intellectual humility.
Absolutely right, and in this, it's back to developing awareness and the broader sense of humility. That when we start having these conversations with our colleagues, that we need to make sure that we're coming into it with an open mind. That, hey, I don't have all the answers here. I'm really trying to listen, to learn, maybe get in touch with your sense of curiosity. Might be another way to think about it, as a manager, as a leader, as a friend, and really understanding that different, maybe it's a little different point of view or a very different experience that you haven't had. And I think that's one of the things that's very eye-opening for many of us as allies and gets us pulled into this wanting to do more and understanding what would be most effective in really helping somebody, is to really get in touch with that sense of curiosity and what would be the most effective way to do that. And you really got to listen hard and really have a great back and forth dialogue conversation to be able to do that.
So I have one more question. We're starting to wrap up, so I want to invite everyone to ask a question, because I have a question I just thought of, but I have one more anonymous question. But audience, go ahead and type in the comments any questions. The question I just had, what was the question that I just had for you? I forgot, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you the anonymous one. It says, some men that I work with were raised in a culture while women are seen as subservient and need to stay in their place, quote unquote. What advice do you have for them, please?
That's a tough one. And, I think we encounter that. There's a cultural nuance here, right? And whether it's religious or some other geographic culture, people may bring attitudes about what's appropriate for women and men into the workplace. And I think job one is we need to be respectful, right? We got to respect culture. We got to respect background. I don't want to turn this, let's assume it's a male employee. I don't want to turn him off immediately. But what I want to try and do is tap in to some motivation for him, right? What's the opportunity here for you if you become more inclusive in your leader behavior, in your relationships, in this case with women at work? How is this possibly going to benefit you? There's so much opportunity. We shared some of the benefits that men often report when they have better relationships with women at work, but there's some other things. How about just the moral case, right? It's the right thing to do. Or how about the personal? Are there women in your life, like your daughter or your partner or a good close colleague that you really care about? And for some men, it's a business case. Hey, what's the opportunity if you bring in more talented women who you've been excluding? What's the opportunity for your company in terms of the bottom line? So I think you have to find out what motivation might really connect with this gentleman who's having trouble. Here's my final thing, though. And I guess this is kind of a full stop for me. In the 21st century, if you're a male who will not have meetings with women, who will not, have private meetings to give feedback with women, who can't include them in meaningful ways in the team, I just don't think you're cut out for leadership. I'm sorry. Maybe we can find a place in the organization for you, but 21st century leaders have to be inclusive in their leader brand. And I think that's just something we have to be able to communicate.
Okay. That was the last. I don't have any more comments or questions from the audience, but I am going to ask the audience if they want to type up any of their key takeaways in the comments. I will create a post for everyone, but I also have some, and I'll read those out. But I did have two final questions for you both to address, please. And I think they're really important for anybody who wants to be a better ally and isn't yet. Where do they start? Okay. How does someone who's new to this start? And then the second, that's A, and B is thank you. Nirupa's saying yes to inclusive leaders. She loves that comment. So number one is, where do people start? And how about those who are already, working on and trying to be a better ally? I'm always trying to be a better one. What else can we be doing? So if you don't mind answering that, please.
Maybe I'll start, Brad.
Sure.
And one of my favorites is I'm actually going to take it out of the workplace. And I'm going to say, you have got to start at home. And I'm speaking to especially the men out there who are partnered in heterosexual relationship with women at home, and you have got to be a great ally at home. Most of us come from dual career, dual earner families today. That is the norm across most societies today. And if we're ever going to get to gender equality, true gender equity in the workplace, we got to start at home. And by doing our fair share of the domestic labor, the unpaid labor, the caregiving, the invisible labor, the emotional labor that we know goes on, and women are doing 2 to 3 times, if not more, of that at home. And if we're ever going to get there, we've got to step up and start doing our fair share. The really interesting part about it is we know from the research is that when men start doing this at home, it changes their behavior in the workplace. It reprioritizes how they think about paid work and unpaid work. And the other part of it is we can do it for the next generation too, for those who have children out there. And we know that when men show up as allies very visibly at home with their children, it has an impact on the next generation. And so for our sons, they have a more inclusive perspective of gender roles when they get into the workplace and how they're going to combine work and family. And certainly for our daughters, they're more likely to persist in their careers, reach those career goals and dreams, as well as go into more non-traditional professions and industries that have been long male dominated. So let's start at home.
Yeah. And so maybe here are a couple for people who have been doing some of the work, but want to up their game and kind of take some next steps. I'm going to talk about sponsorship first. Too many women report that when they're being mentored, they get the nice stuff, right? Men are nice to them, but what they're not getting is the loud sponsorship. And so if you want to take allyship to the next level, you need to become the raving fan of high talent women that you're mentoring or that you admire. Talk about them when they're not in the room. When any conversation about promotion or next opportunity comes up, insert her name into the conversation. If you're not putting skin in the game as a full-throated ally, I think that's a huge missed opportunity. Number 2, we're entering a phase, we all are aware of this, of pushback on DE&I, right? We just heard a comment this week that, well, she was a DEI hire, referring to a very significant woman leader in our country. You need to be ready to respond to that, right? What are you talking about, right? Are you seriously reducing all of her competence, talent, and performance simply to one demographic feature about her? I find that offensive. You need to be ready to take a stand when you hear that kind of narrative. I think that can be more uncomfortable, right, for would-be allies, but this is where we show up, right? Systemic public allyship.
Okay, now we have 2 more minutes. I want to quickly run through some of the key takeaways I got. The big trick of allyship is having the triple equation: awareness, education, and action. Everyday actions make a ton of difference. You've got to get self-educated. There's a million ways to do that. You need to avoid assumptions, ask. You need to consider disrupting in a kind and respectful way. Think about the 2-second rule, like just say, hey, ouch. Consider the reluctant male syndrome, that this does cause fear. It's not easy, and it is awkward. Stay humble and curious, ask for and get feedback, try to listen generously, try to avoid assumptions like in thinking that you have to fix a problem when a woman's talking to you or anybody. Consider cultural nuances and be respectful of them. Tap into what the opportunity and motivations are for people. And start at home and consider sponsoring ship and becoming a raving fan of anyone. Now, those are some of my key takeaways. I want to quickly ask one more question, then we're going to pull the winner. Fernando's saying he's experienced it where his leader is like supposedly an ally, but really it's kind of not really true. Whereas some of the people under him are allies. So what recommendation you have for people who aren't the most powerful in the room, who really are true allies, and the bosses are just sort of, just plain lip service?
Yeah. Go ahead, Dave. I'll follow.
Yeah, a couple issues there. One is talking about how do we talk about things that are working well that people are doing every day. And I think from a grassroots perspective, this is something that's really important. That again, we don't want to put people up on a pedestal for doing what they should be doing. But at the same time, I think a lot of people, when they take these actions, they don't necessarily do it from an allyship perspective. They do it because that's who they are as people, as part of their personal brand, or maybe as who they are as leaders as well. But it's also helpful to understand sometimes the impact that it's having on you personally. And so sharing that, I think, in an open conversation would be very helpful, as well as from what I think of as the performative side, which is what the boss in this case was talking about there, and making sure that, again, somebody has that open conversation with the boss about how it's impacting others, and making sure that they understand that what real allyship looks like, and using specific examples, I think, of these grassroots efforts, these other people maybe at a lower level. But Brad?
No, I think that's perfect. And last thing, don't forget the power of numbers, right? If you're
Yeah.
junior, collaborate with some other allies, and maybe go to that boss as a group, not individually. There's a less risk for you, and just say, hey, boss, we have noticed certain behaviors and they're concerning to us. Can we share what those concerns are? But do it as a group.
Excellent. Okay, now I'm going to remind, because some more people joined us since we started. If you want to win the free book, you need to put in the comments the symbol hashtag and ally, ALLY. I'm going to pull that back up again. Go ahead and type it in if you're here and you want to win the free copy, and it's going to be personalized with this exceptional book. So hashtag ally. Can you all see the screen now? Let's see.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I haven't done this before, so give me. Oh boy, did I not do it right? Oh dear, I didn't do it right. Oh dear. Okay, guess what? I don't know what to say. David and Brad, I'm going to buy books for everyone who enters. Give it Marianne, Nirupa, Sean, Becky, Fernando. I'm going to buy those books from you, and then we're going to sign and send it to all 4 of them, because there's 4. How many? There's only 5 people. Fernando, Becky, Sean, Nirupa, Marianne, and that's it. So wait, does anybody else? Somebody else already has a book, so they don't need it. Okay, guys, I'm sorry. I knew it. I wouldn't do it right. Wait, maybe it'll work like this. Nope, won't work. Okay, well, I want to make 3 suggestions before we hang up. If you're not following the rock stars of Brad Johnson and David Smith on LinkedIn, please do. They also have a LinkedIn company page, which is called Workplace Allies. I recommend you follow that. But if you're planning a company meeting, a firm retreat, a business meeting, a practice group meeting, please consider hiring them, because they're outstanding. And they do workshops, they do live, they do in person, they do half an hour, they do hours, half hours. And go ahead and feel free to reach out to any of us as you wish. But David, I just remembered the question I was going to ask. How many interviews have you guys done all told for all 3 of your books, right? How many approximately? Like thousands?
Oh,
I don't know, we're in thousands, but we're definitely in the hundreds.
Yeah, it's hundreds. Yeah.
Well, my point is, you couldn't be more legit. Listen, on behalf of David and Brad, I want to say thank you for joining us, and I want to thank David and Brad for coming, and we want to wish everyone a great day. Bye, everybody.